Welcome to Mission Promise, Navigating Special Education for Military Families. I'm your host, Mary, and a fellow military spouse. I'm so excited to be here with you, sharing stories, insights, and resources that can help military families like ours navigate the world of special education. So let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to Mission Promise, Navigating Special Education for Military Families. Today, joining us is a special guest, Blair Matsumoto. Blair is the legal assistant EFMP attorney for Navy Region Southwest. He is a licensed active attorney in California with inactive law license in Maryland and Washington, D.C. Blair also has extensive experience in higher education law. He was in the General Counsel's Office for D.C. Public Schools, served as an outside counsel for public and charter schools, and was a full-time professor and director of bar preparation and academic success for a law school in California. Welcome, Blair.
Good morning, Mary. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy that you could join me today. So before we dive into today's discussion, was there anything else you would like to say to our listeners regarding who you are and what you do?
Yes, ma'am. As you mentioned, my name is Blair Matsumoto, and I am the EFMP attorney here out in Region Southwest, which covers most of California and small parts of Nevada and Arizona. Any opinions that I give today are mine and mine alone and do not reflect the opinions of the Department of Defense, the United States Navy, or the Office of the Judge Advocate General.
Thank you for that disclaimer, Blair. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so today's discussion, we're going to talk about EFMP, obviously, and special education legal assistance across DoD. So if you're ready, we can begin.
Absolutely.
All right. So my first question for you, Blair, is how can military families access special education legal support? And what steps should parents take if they believe their child is not receiving appropriate special education services?
So for special education support in the Navy, there are currently 3 areas of responsibility that have special education support. The 3 areas are Norfolk, San Diego, and newly added in Jacksonville, Florida. There are a couple of ways that you can get to the legal assistance office. You can go directly to the legal assistance office. However, sometimes the issues that parents are experiencing are not necessarily ones that need an attorney. And in San Diego, Norfolk, and now in Jacksonville, there's an intermediary called a regional special education liaison. And they work for Fleet and Family Services and the EFMP program. And sometimes they can help with things that don't necessarily need an attorney's eye. And you can get to your regional special education liaison through your case liaisons. They can refer you. I don't know the Jacksonville Region Special Education Liaison, but I know that in San Diego and in Norfolk, both Kelly and Erica have educational backgrounds. So oftentimes, simple questions, they are a great resource to assist families with. If it becomes a legal need, then you'll come to the legal assistance office and you'll fill out what's called an intake form. We will do a conflicts check, and then assuming everything is good to go, then we can engage in an attorney-client relationship with you. In terms of the steps that parents should take if they believe their child is not receiving appropriate special education services, obviously working with the school is the easiest. However, that isn't always the best solution. A big problem is sometimes parents don't know what they're legally entitled to, right? And they're listening to what the school is telling them. They're listening to what other parents are telling them. And, that's why it helps to have a consultation with us, because we can say, okay, here's what the school is legally obligated to provide. Now, obviously, there's this tension between what the parents want and what the schools are legally obligated to offer. Sometimes there's a big divide there. I get that. I mean, I'm a parent myself. You want the best for your children. The question is, does the law have to give you the best? And unfortunately, the answer is no. I would say that the standard is higher now than it was, 30 years ago. It's still not on the school district to offer everything and anything to maximize a child's full potential, unfortunately. But I would say that the step that they should take if they don't believe their child receiving appropriate special education instruction and services is to reach out to the regional special education liaison, see if she can help I say she because Kelly and Erica are both female. And then if they can't, they will then refer the cases up to us. And generally what happens is the parents come in and I sit down with them and I talk with them. Sometimes it's in person. We also do remote appointments. We can do Zoom, we can do Teams, we can do telephonic, and go over all the issues and to see where they believe the school is falling short for their child. And that's usually the first meeting that we have. Sometimes we're getting families that are brand new to the special education process and they don't know anything. But more often than not, it's families that are experienced IEP warriors that are just frustrated with the school and the school district in terms of what they're providing for the child.
So you mentioned that there's now newly added Jacksonville, so Norfolk, Jacksonville, and San Diego. Do you foresee maybe more attorneys being placed in other duty locations?
I'm not aware of any. I believe there's probably a need up in the Pacific Northwest. We have several bases in Washington. We have Bremerton, we have Everett, we have Whidbey Island. So I believe there's a need as well. Anywhere where you've got a higher concentration of EFMP families, so your Category 4 and Category 5 EFMP families, and it's going to be in those areas and also the DC metro area because we have Bethesda, we have Walter Reed there. I think there's a need for these services. So I'm hopeful that they will expand the program at least one more, if not two more attorneys. Otherwise, in other locations, it's going to be a collateral duty, just normal legal assistance attorneys. And those could be JAGs, those could be civilians, and they will likely loop us in at some point and we will consult with attorneys in other areas, which we have done in other areas like Guam, Naples, Washington State, Groton, Connecticut, where there haven't been attorneys. We've worked with the base JAGs, we've worked with legal assistance attorneys to try to help the families and figure out what's going on.
That's good to know. What would you say are some common legal pitfalls that families should be aware of when dealing with school districts?
So I think particularly for military families, this mobility issue of every 2.8 years creates a unique set of problems. What we see is that the families don't come with all of the records. So then the schools say, oh, we don't have a complete set of records. We need to reevaluate, and services and instruction get pushed out. You'll have different situations in different states. Some states are really good about offering related services that are not, I would say, of the normal run-of-the-mill type, things like dance therapy or music therapy, things that are outside of your normal speech language, OT, PT, and adaptive PE. We see families that come to California with out-of-state IEPs that don't make sense to anyone in California. A particular issue is in Tennessee, because in Tennessee, if you have a child that is gifted, they put them on an IEP. And when they leave Tennessee and go to pretty much any other state in the union, their child's not eligible and they don't understand why. And it's because it's not one of the categories recognized under IDEA or out here under the California Department of Education regs. Out-of-state IEPs can read differently, and sometimes there's some interpretation that has to go on to figure out how would this look in California versus Tennessee or Norfolk, Virginia.
Gotcha. How can military families ensure that their child's, I guess you just pretty much answered that for me. I was going to ask, how can military families ensure that their child's special education needs are met when they relocate? And one of them being making sure that they have the records.
The records are so important. I would say parents should keep two sets of records. They should keep both a physical copy and they should keep a digital copy in whatever your digital repository of choice is, whether it's Google Drive or Dropbox, whatever, so that they have at the ready all of the information. So when they go to the school and the school says, oh, we don't have that. Oh, here, let me email it to you. Or would you like a hard copy? Because the school only has what the old school has sent, right? And they can't create these records out of thin air, but the parents should have these things. And ideally, you shouldn't even wait for the old school to send the records. My suggestions when you register the child, make their most recent IEP, their most recent assessment, all that available to the receiving school so that you can get things started immediately and there's no delay. Because you don't want a child not to receive services because they don't have some paperwork, right? These kids need every single instructional minute and related services minute they can get. And any delay will hold them back on their IEP goals. And nobody wants that. I don't think the school is necessarily the enemy here. They can be, but for the most part, I find that the schools, they do want to educate the kids. And parents' job is to help facilitate that by making sure that they have an accurate and complete set of records to give to the receiving school so that they are ready on day one to help the children.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. We at Partners in Promise, we are keen on that. I don't know if you had a chance to actually look at our website and see that we offer binders for the families to download. We used to have physical copies, and we still do when we have our workshop, but it's essentially a toolkit for them to take around where they have a checklist, the Bill of Rights in there, resources, everything all in one so they can take with them as they move to each new location so they can have that readily available for when they go and enroll their kids at the new schools.
And it's super important to have these records because a child's IEP, while the legal obligation ends when they leave high school, oftentimes when they go to college, colleges have a disability services office and they will allow those accommodations on tests. They will allow things like bigger printing. They will work with students who had IEPs to get those same accommodations. So having a complete IEP, complete evaluations are super important. Likewise, when the child goes to take things like the SAT, if you want accommodations, you better have updated evaluations and an updated IEP. And you submit those to the college board, and then the college board then will grant accommodations like additional testing time. But these are things that they don't tell you, but really helpful to kids. We had a family member who had an IEP and he had taken the SAT, didn't do very well, and basically he ran out of time. So we filed an appeal with College Board to get him more time, and we put in all of his assessments, all of his IEP documents, and he was granted time and was able to do well enough to get into the school of his choice. The IEP, while the legal obligation ends when the child leaves high school, it has some value as they're moving towards college.
Yeah, that's good to know. I've heard from some families who don't realize, the IEP is done or they graduated out, so I don't know if my child's going to go to college just because of the testing and just the school load and things like that. But knowing that you can still have those evaluations and apply it, take it to college and, like you said, submit it to the college board and get these accommodations that's needed is very helpful.
And it's really important because just because a child leaves high school doesn't mean their disability ends. And they have been successful using accommodations and other tools to help them. And there's no reason why those should end. And colleges will grant extra time. The professors don't know. I taught graduate school for 10 years. The professors don't know extra time on tests because we're not involved in the testing. There's a testing services division that handles testing and proctoring and all that. All we get at the end are the papers to grade. And there's no red mark on it this child has a disability, this child got extra time. We don't see any of that. That happens on the back end, and then we get the papers to grade. Don't be afraid if you're a parent and your child's heading into college, ask, who is the disability services coordinator? Where can we find out about accommodations? Things like that, because that will help them be successful in college like they were in high school.
Yes, that's really good to know. What would you say are some resources that are available to help the parents understand their rights under the special education law?
I would say the number one thing for parents to understand their rights is when you go to an IEP meeting, from the start of you request an evaluation to the last IEP meeting you have. Every time you go to an IEP meeting, you get a handout, and it's usually entitled Procedural Safeguards. Nobody reads them. And it is a breakdown of all of your rights under federal and usually state law. Every district has them. DIA has their own. These are your basic rights as a parent with a child with a disability. And you'll get enough to paper a wall with them by the time you're finished with the IEP process and your kid graduates. But nobody reads them. But it gives them all of those basic rights, even simple stuff like, can I record meetings? Who can I bring to meetings? If every parent read and memorized those procedural safeguards, they would be far better off in the IEP process. So that would be the first thing I would say is make sure you read and understand your procedural safeguards. There's also usually information available in the State Department of Ed. So here in California, the Department of Education has a special education dedicated page that has its own procedural safeguard, has a lot of explanatory material. Same with the Federal Department of Education. They have an IDEA page. And I would find reading through what are called OSEP letters, which is the Office of Special Education Programs. They issue these letters. And what happens is parents or attorneys will ask a question and they will give the federal government's interpretation of that question. And the OSEP letters are searchable. You can just put in a topic like recording in class or one-on-one aid for field trips, and you'll often find information. There are also some great organizations out there. I know you all do a lot for military families, and we thank you for that. Here in California, Disability Rights California is a big organization, and they have something on their website called the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual. And it is a chapter by chapter breakdown of the special education process. It's a very useful tool for families. We have our parent resources that are funded by the state, and a good one that's funded by the state is TASK, particularly with respect to assistive technology. They do a lot with assistive technology because it's an area that most people don't understand. And frankly, it's an area that a lot of educators don't understand. They don't see the need for certain things, whereas with certain disabilities like dyslexia, a computer can be really useful in terms of text-to-speech to text, keeping them organized, setting up alerts. If you've got a child with executive functioning issues, computers can be really useful. And that's on top of kind of the general assistive technology like AAC devices that kids with autism spectrum disorder use. There's just so much available in terms of software and programs and hardware. I don't think people make as much use of as they could. And a group like TASK can help families with that. And it's not something that's intuitive, and it's not something that there's a lot of resources out on the normal places people look for disability rights information or educational law information. I would recommend, as a California approved organization, that TASK is a good one for parents to use in California. If they have information that's useful just in general for children in school with disabilities.
That's very helpful. Thank you for mentioning that.
You're welcome.
How many cases have you done thus far in your time as an attorney?
Oh, I was on the school side before, and I think I had over 200 cases. I think right now, gosh, I couldn't tell. There's probably about 40 active cases, I would guess, between 20 and 40 active cases at any one time. Most of the time, things get resolved without due process. Okay. I know in Virginia and in California, due process is not friendly to families. I think the school's win rate is somewhere around 70, and it's not a friendly process to families. You can do it without an attorney, but it would be really hard. So you have to engage an attorney, or you have to come to one of us. We can do due process. Our limitation with due process is we don't have experts. So parents would have to fund an expert witness to explain what the deficiencies are in the program, what the deficiencies are in the placement, why something isn't correct. So to the extent we can, we try to handle disputes without going to due process. Sometimes that has meant mediation. Sometimes that has meant settlement agreements with districts, just negotiated with district council and district special education coordinators or directors, because due process is not likely to be a winning proposition for parents. And it's expensive because even if you're not paying me, you're having to pay expert witnesses, and those can run several $100 an hour. So, you could easily have thousands of dollars in expert witness fees. But what it does mean, though, is that we're very hands-on. A lot of special education attorneys, they only do due process. We dive in much earlier. We go to IEP meetings. I spend a lot of time out of the office in schools in IEP meetings. I go to IEP meetings with parents. I also do it virtually sometimes, especially if the families are out of the greater San Diego area. But I drive a lot, and I know Alex, who's a special ed attorney in Norfolk. We're always out of the office at the school sites. I'm working with schools directly. I will go with parents and do a potential placement tour. The other day, I was with a family and the child was being assessed because they didn't understand what was going on. So I said, let me go with you and I can explain what they're doing and why they're doing it. So really, what we're trying to do is get involved in the front end so there's not issues on the back end. And when things pop up with the IEPs, we try to hammer that out so that we don't have this ongoing problem. Because what happens is the parent gets an IEP, they're not happy with it. They don't say anything because they don't know that they can, or they do say anything and they're ignored. And sadly, things happen when we show up, not because we are Superman and Superwomen, but because when we walk into a room, they see dollar signs, right? They see, oh, they have an attorney, we need an attorney. And there's a whole cottage industry in California, these firms that do school side representation. There's probably about 6 or 8 attorneys throughout the state that have the bulk of the school district businesses. And it's money because they are billing for every single thing they do, which unfortunately takes money out of the general education fund paying attorneys. We would prefer that not to happen. So we get involved at the onset. We help with writing a request for assessments. We request IEP meetings. We will help families request a copy of their file. Parents have a right to a copy of their child's special education file. If you think something isn't there or you don't have all of that, you should request that from the school. They got 5 business days to get that to you. And at times, especially if there's a broken relationship, I'm the conduit between the parent and the school. I'll go and pick up the records. I'll go and do things because unfortunately, some of these families have been in this fight for a long time. And eventually it gets so emotionally taxing that it's really hard to want to deal with the schools. But the idea is, let's not get there. Let's get to a good relationship with the school. Let's get the child everything that they are legally obligated to have. And sometimes that means educating the school, say, we can't do that. Well, why not? The law allows for it. You can do a lot with accommodations and services and instruction. Sometimes schools are thinking very narrowly, and we have to help them think more broadly or muster resources that they're not currently using. The IEP needs to be individualized to the child. And sometimes these schools get in this habit of cutting and pasting. Oh, we have a child, they have autism spectrum disorder, so therefore they need this, and this is what they're getting. But special education is not a one-size-fits-all solution. They always say, if you've met a child with autism, you've met one child with autism. And it's the same for all of these kids, right? Every child comes with strengths and weaknesses and things that need improvement. And it's different for every kid. So even if you've got 10 kids with dyslexia, what they need is going to look different for each of those 10 kiddos. And sometimes
So true.
reminding the schools of that is half the battle, that they need to see this child, not a child with autism or a child with dyslexia.
I think our families, our listeners, they will be delighted to know that you guys can help on the onset at the start and able to help families, assist them in developing and implementing the IEP. That's great to know because I don't think a lot of families know that aspect of it. And going back to the due process, what advice would you give to parents who actually have to prepare for a due process hearing?
I would say document. And even before you get to the due process, parents need to get in the habit of putting everything in writing. Because what happens is the parent makes a request or the teacher grabs the parent at pickup and says, oh, we're having this issue, or, oh, the speech language therapist is going to be out for 2 weeks. And these interactions happen, and that's fine. But what I recommend to parents is when you have these in-person interactions, follow up with an email. Make sure you are doing things so that if in the future you need to prove that a conversation existed, you can. To that extent, for important things, I would not recommend using Google Classroom Dojo, any types of those learning management systems, because the problem is you don't control access to that. And things sometimes disappear from those. If it's important, send an email. I know some teachers like to use text, but again, it's informal and it's messier when you try to print text, save text, and things like that. I recommend parents use email and make sure you're documenting everything. A well-prepared due process case has something that can prove the allegations. And teacher told me this, or the principal promised this. It's one of those things, though, if it's not in writing, it doesn't really exist. Make sure you're sending those follow-up emails. And it can be something simple. Hey, thanks for letting me know little Taylor's having issues on the playground. As I mentioned, I'd really like for the school to do a functional behavior assessment so that we can get to the root and see if we can all help Taylor become a better boy at the playground or something like that. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to have ed code sites, things like that, but just so that there is a record and it's a running record so that you as the parent say, look, I let the school know there were these problems. I requested this evaluation. I asked for an IEP meeting. We're seeing right now, parents are asking for IEP meetings and they're giving dates 3 months down the road. And that's not acceptable. So if that's happening and you want to challenge that at some point, you need to be able to have that paper trail of, I asked for an IEP meeting August 28th. I renewed my request on September 30th. I renewed my request on October 15th, and they held it November 1st. If nothing else, there's a procedural violation there in addition to possibly a substantive violation, but you have to be able to prove it. The schools have much better documentation in most cases than parents, right? And the problem with due process for schools is that if you have a parent that's challenging placement, the district has a whole stable of experts they can call on to testify. And sometimes hearing officers or independent law judges are wowed by this whole laundry list of experts, and the parents don't have that. And so for a parent case to be strong, you really need to have the evidentiary proof. That, and to have someone to speak on your behalf to explain why something is not appropriate. Because most of the time, the hearing officer is not going to accept the parent saying, I'm not seeing Johnny getting any better. They want someone to explain on the record why Johnny is failing to make progress in his IEP goals and what should be done differently. And that's outside the scope of most parents. And that's not to say that parents are dumb. They just don't have that level of technical knowledge. Nobody knows their children more than they do. Like, they are their children's experts. But what a hearing officer needs to see on the record is an explanation of why the school is failing this child. And a parent can give anecdotal, but they want the technical explanation of what went wrong and what else needs to be done or what needs to be done differently.
Well, Blair, besides all the wonderful advice you gave as far as documenting everything, having two types of copy, digital and physical copy, emailing over texting and verbal communication, what other advice would you give to our families, whether they're seasoned or just beginning when it comes to EFMP and the special education legal assistance?
So I would say the key for this process is really trust but verify. I believe that most of the teachers and most of the administrators want to do the right thing. Now, that's not to say they all do. I have my disagreements with schools. I have my grudge list of people that I feel aren't doing the best for the kids. But I think for the most part, they try, particularly the classroom teachers. Being a classroom teacher is not an easy job. And they're having to manage a lot. And these schools are putting a lot on these teachers. In addition to being the classroom teacher, hey, we're also going to make you the case manager for 10 kids, and you've got to manage the IEP process throughout the year. It's a tough job. My wife was a teacher. My mom was a teacher. I have a lot of educators in my family, so I've been around education a lot. I never taught in elementary or secondary school. I taught grad school, but it's nowhere near the challenge of being a elementary or secondary school teacher. So, I think the most important thing is to listen to what the school says and see, is this going to help my child? Make sure that they are not just going through the motion. Does this track with what you know of your child? Because again, you're your child's expert. There is no one sitting at that IEP table that will know as much about the child as the parent. And they need to remember that they are a super important member of the IEP team. In fact, they might be the most important member of the IEP table. And they shouldn't be made to feel like they're an afterthought. They are a legally obligated member of the IEP, and they should act like that. Meaning that if they don't understand something that's being said, something that's going on, ask for an explanation. The school needs to provide that. We live in this educational alphabet soup world with FBA, P, and this and that. And it's tough because you may not know all these acronyms. So if you don't know, ask for an explanation. The school needs to do that. This is your child. This is their IEP. This is their future. They shouldn't feel rushed. I'm seeing these schools sometimes set IEP meetings for half hour, 45 minutes, which is absolutely ridiculous because there's probably 10 minutes of introductions at the start. They need to make sure that they are understanding what it is that's going on. They need to understand what level of instructional services the child is getting, where the child is going to be placed, meaning what level of classroom. Is it going to be a gen ed classroom with some push in and pull out? Are we looking at a segregated classroom in a comprehensive campus, meaning that they're in a special day class, but they're at a school with neurotypical or non-disabled children? Is it a special day school where they only have disabled children with disabilities on campus? All of these things are important because they will affect the quality of education. And the parents should never be made to feel stupid or that they're asking unnecessary questions. They have the right to have their questions answered. And they have the right to be fully functioning, involved, engaged members of IEP, and they should accept no less. This idea that parents can be shouted down at the IEP table is ridiculous, and schools should not be doing it. And if you as a parent feel like they are doing it, contact your case liaison, contact your legal assistant's EFMP attorney, because you are important. You're going to be the one who is responsible for making sure your child gets what they need and can succeed in the world. Because way after they leave the school system, they're still going to be leaning on mom, dad, auntie, whoever to help them figure out the world. The parents need to be involved and they need to make sure they are being. I will say, this doesn't mean screaming at school staff. Even if school staff is being nasty, the parents should never be, because I have seen it come up in due process hearings. And for some reason, the hearing officers seem to take a much stricter approach on parents who are nasty than school staff. Ideally, nobody's nasty in the process. Wow. But I have seen school staff in IEP meetings be absolutely ridiculous. And yet there doesn't necessarily seem to be consequences. Sometimes there are, but usually there is not. But never drop down to their level. The Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go. I think that's a good kind of North Star for IE process and negotiation. Is never drop down, always stay above board so that no one can ever say, they yelled at me or they did this. No, it's always been polite. It has always been above board. The school staff isn't one of the problems. Let them defend their staff behavior. You never want to be in a position to have to defend your own.
Excellent advice, Blair. And I appreciate you reaffirming to our families and parents that we are important. We're probably the most important piece when it comes to these IEP meetings. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time and joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We get to serve military families, and it is an incredible privilege to do so because military families give up so much for this country. They are disrupted every 2.8 years. The kids are in 6 to 8 schools by the time they graduate, and it's done to keep all of us safe. So whatever we can do to help military families, and particularly EFMP families, we are happy to do so because military families just put so much on the line for us. And for that, we should be grateful.
Thank you so much for joining Mission Promise on this special education journey. We hope that our discussions, stories, and resources will provide valuable insights and support for you and your family. Remember, you're not alone in this. Stay connected with our community, share your experiences, and continue to advocate for your child's education. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, take care and keep navigating with strength and resilience.
This episode was sponsored by the Fort Liberty Spouses Club, whose mission is to grow, support, and serve the Fort Liberty community.